Hello and welcome to The Premise. I'm Jennifer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson.
And today we are here with Stephen P. Kiernan, who is a fantastic author, but also just really an amazing guy. And I hope, listener, you get to know him a little bit during this conversation. I've been following him for a couple years now. And so this is a real honor to have Stephen on The Premise. So let's tell you a little bit about him. Stephen P. Kiernan is the author of the novels The Curiosity, The Hummingbird, The Baker's Secret, Universe of Two, and The Glass Chateau. A graduate of Middlebury College, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, he spent more than 20 years as a journalist, winning many awards before turning to fiction writing. He has also worked nationwide on improving end-of-life medical care through greater use of hospice. Kiernan lives in Vermont, where I'm guessing it's quite chilly. Yes?
Yes, it is today. Always it is. Until June or so. Yes.
Right. But really beautiful. So there's that.
Yes, I love it here. I've been here a long time.
Nice. Well, so today we're going to talk about your forthcoming book. It's coming out May 19th, Pollock's Last Lover, a novel of art and deception. This was a really good book. And what I found kind of fascinating about it, Stephen, is at the end of it, it really wasn't that much about Pollock as it was about the women in his life. Can you tell us a little bit about this book, Pollock's Last Lover, and what it meant for you to write it?
Well, first, can I just say, like, how you just made my day?
Yeah.
Because there have been very, very few, really, there have been very few readers so far. The book's not available, so it's when it's, provided to the media before interviews and that sort of thing. And you got exactly the point, which is that Pollock is central to this book, but he is not the main character. He's probably about fourth, maybe fifth. And it is really about the women around him in two different periods of time, and one when he's alive and one when he's not. And I had tried years ago to write a book about Pollock's, the last section of his life, and it was really dark and very depressing. And this isn't now, I think, at all. It was much more interesting to me to learn about his wife and his lover and the people who are dealing with his works later on in subsequent generations. And it became sort of an examination of the roles of women and how women have power in 1956 compared with contemporary times.
Yeah.
So the quick plot summary is this. Jackson Pollock, right, considered the greatest painter in America in the early 1950s, late 1940s, died in 1956. And 50 years later, one of his paintings sold at auction for $140 million, the most ever paid for work of art at the time. And about 3 weeks later, this woman came forward and said, "Hey, I was his sweetheart at the end of his life. I was his lover, and he made his last painting for me. And I've been keeping it in my apartment in the West Village in New York City all these years. And I realized the world needs to see his works, so I want to bring it out to the world so that everyone can see it. And the bidding will start at $50 million. And then you have the story of a young woman who's very ambitious in this auction company trying to authenticate the painting. And so two different women and their relationship with Pollock and their relationship with power and how they think women succeed and support each other or don't. And I had a lot of fun with it. A lot of discovery.
I bet. And it was fun reading it. And I also thought it was really interesting because we're looking at these women and their lives and how the times affect what they're capable of, or what they're allowed to do, I should say, and what they think they're capable of. And being written from the perspective of a man, I thought was very interesting.
Well, it meant that I was very careful, and I spent a lot of time running this by female readers all through it. And, there's a scene early on in the book, for example, where a young woman who is not very experienced as a model has a photographer say at the end of a catalog shoot, he says, "Hey, I'll shoot some new headshots for you if you like, for free." And she says, "Sure, great." And everyone leaves, and now she's alone with this guy, and he's photographing her, and he's asking her to be in suggestive poses. And when she resists, he says, you're never going to have a career in this if you're going to be, a diva all the time. All of this sexual harassment pressure. And, I went around to my nieces, for example, some of my nieces, and I'd say, is this realistic at all? And they would say 100% all young women have experienced it, all. And so that was really sobering for me. I thought it was, a portion because there's some jerks, but it turns out it's still now even common behavior. And so that just made me feel like I need to be that much more careful. And my editor's female, the marketing person on my book, the publicist, my agent. I mean, it's women. Oh, the publisher is a woman, and so I count on all of them. They're all strong women. They would not be shy in the least about setting me straight on things, and so I depended on that. And then I took what risks I thought I could get away with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and let's talk about these two female characters. So we've got Ruth Kligman, and it's 1950s, 1956, and in present time we've got Gwen. So it's 2006, and they're both very strong women. They're very strong characters who are really trying to make it in the same way, interested in their own power and in that scene, when Ruth is in getting her headshots done, she says no to a lot of things. She's aware of the fact that this might get me somewhere, but I know that this is not, I can't say yes. And so many women say yes because they think they don't have a choice. But Ruth, she had some chutzpah, didn't she?
A little bit she did, yes. And it was actually, this is just almost embarrassing to say, but there was a thing. I remember being in like 8th grade or so. And that summer, one of my friends would go up to girls and say, can you touch your elbows behind your back? And,
that was a thing.
And some of them would try it. And of course, it was a way of displaying their breasts. And just like, right. Even though I was 13, I still am embarrassed. Yeah. But then to put that moment in this photographer who's an adult, mm-hmm. photographing a woman who's a young adult, but she's an adult also. And she's like, no, when he says that, he says, put your elbows back. She's like, no, I went to high school, And so she's not, and she does have some power. And in fact, she ends up, I don't know, in a way, she ends up ending this guy's career later in the book, almost in an offhand way. Mm-hmm. And so she does definitely have power. It does depend on her sexuality. And, she's not above flirtations that go much further with certain men if they're in the arts at a kind of status mm-hmm. way. Very different from the woman in 2006, but she has her way. And in fact, she ends up having, she's based on an actual person, the lover that Pollock had in the last 4 months of his life. And she ended up being, hanging out with Andy Warhol and being photographed by Robert Mapplethorpe and being very much like the hip New York City art world. Even though what she'd been, at least at the start, was a girlfriend, somebody's girlfriend, extracurricular, extramarital girlfriend.
And she shows up in New York. She's totally green. I forget where she's from, but it's, some Midwest farm town or something like that. And, mm-hmm. she shows up with her suitcase and she's green, and she learns real fast that she does have power in her sex appeal. And she uses that. In fact, she enjoys it. There's a scene where there's these construction boys and she's on her way to work, and they all like whistle and hoot and holler, and and she kind of like sways, and she gets her strut on because she realizes, you betcha, baby, I've got power. Look at me.
That's exactly, yes. And please.
No, I was just going to say, and then we fast forward to Ruth as an older woman. Now we're in 2006, and Gwen is the young woman who has zero interest in her sex appeal, who really just wants to use her brain, be successful, be taken seriously. And Ruth says to her in a conversation they're having, "You're too young." Ruth waved up and down at Gwen. "You have no inkling of the future, no grief for a body that will not last what your current body makes possible for you. What power there is purely in your physical self." And it's almost like she's admonishing Gwen, like, it's gonna go away. be prepared.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. They actually, I mean, they do not get along well because they have such different ideas.
Yeah.
Right? For Ruth, it is about her sex appeal. It is about her way of calculating. She has maybe we'll talk in a minute about minor characters, but her roommate is educating her about the ways of New York in 1956 in ways that are comical but also correct. Lucy, but meanwhile, Gwen in 2006, like it's fun to go back and look. I don't think of 2006 as historic, but when I went back and look, first of all, it was not a good year for popular music. I always like to have music playing in the background of scenes, and there's like a disco scene, and the music's awful. But on the other hand, she is the first person in her workplace and among her friendships to have purchased one of these crazy new devices, the iPhone.
Right. That was cool.
And it has not very sophisticated MapQuest to get you around. And New York is just starting to turn away from the grieving of 9/11. And they go down there and she has many more friends than Ruth does, and so they have different ways of work, and so they very much, it's oil and vinegar. They do not mix well when they're in scenes with each other, and their ways are trying to prove that this painting is legitimate. It's worth a lot of money to both women if this painting is that she's come forward with is legitimate, is authentic, and so they have the same goal, but their different styles make for all kinds of friction that I think is sort of looking at, we have enormous distance still to travel in the respect for women in this culture, in this country. And yet there has also been enormous progress since 1956. And so that's part of the story too.
Well, and, I also really enjoyed the juxtaposition of, Jackson and Ruth in 1956 and Gwen and Arthur in 2006, because, Jackson and Ruth, their lovemaking is rough. It's almost angry. He takes what he needs from her, and then that's it. She gets something totally different from him. And then with Gwen and Arthur, we have this tenderness where all he wants to do is take care of her and give to her and provide her with not just intimacy, but, really make sure she's taken care of. And their relationships are so opposite. I wonder, was that on purpose, or did that just sort of happen as you were writing?
Well, it's I should say, first of all, this is my 8th book, and it's the first one that has any sex in it. Really, there's like hints of sex in my other books, and this one has a lot of sex in it.
Yeah.
And when I told the marketing director, who's a good friend of mine, we've become great friends over the years, and when I said that this one was pretty saucy, she said, "Well, it's about time, Stephen Kiernan." So I guess I've been holding back, and I didn't know. But in fact, the power that these women have in relationships is reflected in their sexuality and in the kind of lovemaking that they do. And as you said, with Jackson, it's pretty rough business. It's not, it's not very generous, and it's not very gentle. And whereas with Arthur, who's, again, for Gwen, it's a terrible mistake because it's a workplace romance, and she's trying to be the woman of the 21st century. How could she pursue this relationship except that he's a great lover, and he's really sexy, and he's British and kind of charming and humble, and when he wants to make a point, he does it like he's driving a nail. It's so strong and clear, and the contrast to relationships. I don't want to overload it and say all sex was bad in 56 and all sex is great in 2006. I'm sure there were plenty of good and plenty of bad in both times, but it is more to talk about how they are in relationship, how they are in intimacy, and to what extent they are subservient or have like the dominating role, and how that plays out in their relationships. And that their lovemaking is congruent with that.
Very well done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, when did you decide you wanted, or when did you know you were going to write this book? Like, what happened for you? And the rabbit hole you fell into, because I know you must have fallen into one.
Oh, 100 miles deep. Okay. I wish it was this great inspired story, but the reality is, I'm going to say, I don't know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I just heard about like the last couple of months of Jackson Pollock's life. And I thought that is compelling, even though it's really dark. And so I started reading. There's some great biographies, one in particular on him, and there's a great biography of his wife. And there are great books about the artists of that time and abstract expressionism. I didn't even know what it meant. And it was a great little rabbit hole. And I said, this is a book. And I got about 180 pages in. And I said, no, this is the most depressing thing I've ever read, much less written. It is like Jude the Obscure. It's just not good. And so I put it aside and I wrote the Baker's Secret, which actually has been done the best of any of my books. But then when I finished the last book, The Glass Chateau, I had conversations with my editor, and Jennifer Burrell. She's terrific. I really trust her judgment a lot. And we've now worked together for, 15 years or something, across 6 books. And so she said, well, what about that Jackson Pollock book? And I said, well, the problem is so dark. And she said, and she does not normally make me write a formal proposal. And she wanted one for this one. She said, make a formal proposal for the story you want to tell. It was such a great suggestion. Pain in the neck in terms of the time it required, but it made me go back and say, what is the real story here? And it made me realize it is not a passionate artist who's, got mental health issues and substance abuse issues and his genius and what results from that. That story's been told. And that the unique thing was the women around him. His wife, who plenty of people will say is a superior artist to him. She's certainly very strong on her own. And who Ruth was, she wrote a memoir that is unreadably saccharine, but I read it because I had to say, it's painful. And I really felt like I was doing the reader a favor. Like, you don't need to go read her. But anyway, and then to think about what New York was like in 2006 and how the roles of women have changed. And suddenly that became the fascination for me. And it felt like I was learning. It was a different kind of research. Yeah. To go to my nieces and say, have you been hassled this way? They're like, only every time I get on the elevator.
Yeah.
That's a very sobering thing to hear, And one of my early writers is a very successful novelist and friend. And when she read the first part of it and said, you got to go way, way further, she said, you say like that she thought he was his muse when actually she was a siren luring Jackson onto the rocks, and both muse and siren are male constructs.
Right. Yeah.
And I go,
brilliant. You're like, wow.
Yeah. I need to rewrite everything now. And so it was much more. And so there was much more discovery for me in that. And I guess the last thing I'd say is I still don't exactly know what abstract expressionism is, but I know that some of it is spectacular, is incredible, is saying things that cannot be said in any other way. And that Pollock was, because he was mentally unstable and because he was self-medicating with alcohol and just general decadence, that when he was able enough to work, he would go to a place that no one else has really been able to do. And that to me, that made it so all these years later, in between I wrote the Baker's Secret, and then I wrote Universe of Two, and then I wrote The Glass Chateau, and then I went back to trying this again.
Nice.
So I don't know, and I've not done that before, where I went back and I threw away every word. I looked at the 180 pages I had, like, it's going to be great. I'm going to get a first draft in no time. It all had to go.
Wow.
I had to start right from beginning again. Yeah.
And how you depict him as an artist, I presume, is all true. Like the research you found when he would create a piece, and we're talking like 24 feet long, these massive canvases, he would do it. He wouldn't sketch anything out in advance. It was like his brain was just creating this entire piece all at once.
Yes and no. I mean, here's the thing, Jennifer. He couldn't draw. I mean, he spent years at the art students organization and trying to learn how to draw, and he never really got it. And you can look at at other painters of that time, and you look at like a still life that they did, even if what they did as art, as their paintings were totally bizarre and abstract, their drawings looked like what they were drawing at very high level. And he couldn't do that. And so he had to conceive of the work in his head. And that was hard to do. And so the way I describe it in the book is, let's say you're gonna make a cardboard sign that said, "For sale, refrigerator." You know, if you're not artistic, you're going to get like to about refrigerator, and you're going to be running out of space for all those extra letters, you know. And somehow he knew intuitively exactly how large the letters should be so that it would fit perfectly. And that's super reductive, but it is a way that he understood the space of canvas in a unique way. And the other thing I'll say, it's kind of fun. You know, I spent a lot of time at his home in Springs on Long Island, but I also spent hours and hours and hours in his studio. And the floor of that studio changed my opinion of him. To see the spills, and there's, I don't want to say anything about you've read this, so you know there's a scene, a very short moment in the book, but for me it's the most heartfelt moment in the book, is where the character is enacting what I found when I saw it, which is, I won't give it away, but the reason that his biggest paintings were 22 feet is because his studio was 22 feet wide.
Yeah.
It just, you know, so he'd put it on the diagonal so you could step around it, because the canvas is on the floor. If you're using, you know, latex paint, it will run. You can't put it on an easel, so it's got to be on the floor. And so, if his studio had been 4 feet bigger in each dimension, he'd have 26-foot paintings. It was like literally the only you think about the freedom of his imagination, but also the walls of his room.
Okay, so I have two questions, and I'm going to tell you what they are so I don't forget one. I want to talk about Peggy Guggenheim and her piece, because I want to know if that's true. But before we go there, I want to know what it's like as a writer when you go into a space like that, and you just told us you spent a lot of time there. What does that look like? Like just sitting there, like trying to soak it in and contemplate, you just sit in silence? Like bring us into your brain in that moment, in those moments.
Oh boy. Okay. So I guess I should say that The Glass Chateau, which is my most recent novel, all through it, it's a story about men. It starts right after the end of World War II, and it's men who rebuild their lives by building stained glass windows for the cathedrals that had been bombed out during the war.
Right.
And the windows that they used, that I had them build, were the windows that Marc Chagall built. And Marc Chagall is a lovely artist, and I immersed in his life and in his work, and it was very fun. You know, his stuff is like, it's folk art and it's also surrealism, and somehow it's both in a very unthreatening, really fun, loving way. And so I thought, you know, that would be so cool to do with Jackson Pollock. Whoa, what an error. What an underestimating of the madness and the genius. And it was a very different experience. And there were times when I was writing this book where it's like, I don't like this guy.
Yeah.
I don't like this guy.
Yeah.
And, you know, because he had such gifts, but he'd also come from so much anguish. And then he was, you know, using this lover, so I forget what the question was. So what's it like? So the thing is, if you ask your listeners to just open up, you know, their search engine and just put in a Pollock painting, whatever comes up is not going to be like the scene that you understand in an instant. Or if you look at you know, even a Van Gogh, maybe it takes a couple of minutes, but you see, at least the whole thing, you get a pretty good idea of this is a starry night. And these are like how the imagination of the artist made the stars do this in the sky. And I can tell it's a sky and trees and ground. Okay. And so the reading of it takes seconds. And I have spent hours sitting in front of Pollock paintings, finding more things.
Wow.
Finally seeing it, saying, oh, these are the 6 poles. Okay, the blue poles. And that's very interesting. And I know the story of that, but look at what he did there. And it's different here. And it's different here. And in fact, it's like a sequence across from left to right in this painting. And, you know, and the thing is gigantic. And so there's just, I never had the experience of sitting in front, like walking along a painting, reading it. It's a really different thing. And I realized that's what I didn't like. I'd gotten so that when I look at a painting, it's like, well, there it is. Cézanne. Very nice. Look, there's right. There's Monet's garden. Yup. Bridge over the garden, just like I imagined it, and you can look at the detail in it and there's genius and expression in it. But somehow with Pollock, because it was abstract, because it wasn't a bridge over a pond, it was circles of fire that look like they are dancing. And somehow he fit it all in. He made the refrigerator of these dancing characters fit perfectly, and without measuring it, just because he had a concept of space that good.
Interesting.
And that keen, right? And so I found myself interested, and then I started spending more time, and suddenly I would find that I'd spent 90 minutes looking at one painting.
Wow. Where were you when you saw Jackson Pollock in real life?
I've bounced around, but New York City primarily. So there is, in fact, a show coming up in New York City this fall where they're going to have the works of Jackson Pollock and his wife, Lee Krasner, in equal numbers, so that she'll be treated as an equal for the first time.
Yeah,
because she really was. Kept him afloat.
I want to go. Are you going to go? Of course you are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I can totally see you doing a book signing or some sort of an event. I don't know if they'd let you, but that would be cool.
It would be cool. There are lots of books about Jackson Pollock, but there actually aren't novels about him.
Okay, that makes sense.
It was interesting to find that when I did my homework. So I think that they should, make me part of the show. And I should,
totally.
Who knows? But
I agree. I will write them a letter and I'll let them know. Please have.
Thank you so much,
Stephen P. Kiernan there.
There are no literary coattails being grabbed here. No, I think I hope I'll do some speaking about that at various places, and I'm looking forward to seeing it because. A lot of years have gone by, and I just wonder if the world is ready for him yet. We'll see what kind of shape American culture is in when October comes around, and see if this is something that we appreciate or reject.
Right, and things are changing so rapidly here. It could go either way, I think.
Yes.
Let's go back to Peggy. So she commissioned a piece, and it was too long, and they had to make some adjustments, which I can have you talk about. But is that a true story?
Mural is a true story, and it's actually the first Pollock painting I ever saw because it was in the gallery of the museum in Iowa City, Iowa. And I went to graduate school there in the writer's workshop, so I actually saw my first Pollock, I don't know, almost 40 years. No, it can't be.
That's cool.
Let's just say a lot of years before writing this book. So yes, she commissioned a painting that was to fit a wall in her apartment, and she had done a show for him, and he had not fared well. He hadn't sold much work, and the critics had not really loved it so much, and she thought that they were missing the boat. And so she thought, well, one showy thing would be to have a party and have this painting on the wall, a long wall of her apartment. And basically Jackson Pollock did the most agonizing, I don't want to take it away from the book, but the most agonizing kind of avoiding this job and delaying and staring for days on end, the blank canvas. And then 24 hours before it absolutely had to be done. And she also, by the way, she was helping him in other galleries. She was perhaps there's signs that she was paying part of his mortgage. I mean, she was keeping this guy afloat. For a while, she paid him a monthly fee, and whatever he painted, she got. Like, she really was invested in him like no other artist. And so he made the painting in this great binge, and then had to roll it up before it was all the way dry, and they put it up and it didn't fit the wall. And I don't want to give up what happens there, but I would just say it is a matter of historical fact that he was getting drunk while the painting was while the party was taking over, and when things went awry, he just went and peed in the fireplace.
Yeah.
and that's a true story. He did pee in the fireplace. I wouldn't have made that up.
Wow. Well, let's talk about what you made up. And as a historical fiction writer, Talk to us about how much leeway you have to change facts and move things around to fit your story, but still fit within the genre nicely.
This is a thing I've struggled with and worked with in a lot of my books. The Baker's Secret starts out 24 hours before the first men come ashore in the invasion of D-Day. And it's D-Day told from the French perspective. And there are so many buffs and fans and students of D-Day that, boy, I did not play with that at all. I was very much, and I took one liberty, and I heard from readers. And it was a thing that actually occurred, but I made it actually occur earlier. And they were offended by that, and I kind of hear their point. And then University of Two is a love story set amid the Los Alamos in 1944 when they're building the atomic bomb. And again, there were certain things I had to obey. So in this case, especially the 1956 part, things happened at a certain rate, and so all of that had to follow. When Jackson and Ruth meet, when they first make love, when she goes out to Long Island to be near him. And all the things that happen with them. It all has to line up with the reality. And in New York City, Second Avenue never goes uptown. It's a road going down, right? So there's all of this stuff that you have to have right. They can't have too much Duke Ellington playing because his recording time was after 56. Things like that. But then there are two kinds of invention. One is every scene has to take place someplace. And so I have liberty with that. And I have a lot of fun with that. There are ways that this book is a little bit of a love letter to New York City. And
totally,
and how people get around and where they have their conversations, where they kiss for the first time, all of those things are sort of in settings that exist. My first two books were published by St. Martin's, and they were in the Flatiron Building. And across the street, there was this diner that said, clogging people's veins and giving heart disease since 1946. and I considered it my good luck place. And I would go there for a cup of coffee before going in for meetings. It was my first books and I was so nervous. So I put that place, that diner in the novel.
Yeah.
It's just straight out of reality. Okay. And so I really held to that, but then I could fool around with other things. And then I took some liberties. I, for example, put two of Lee Krasner's paintings next to each other in the Whitney Museum in New York. And both paintings have been in the Whitney at some time, but not at the same time. So that's like a minor, that's like, okay, I'm bending reality a little bit just for the sake of the story. There are a couple of characters in this novel who actually serve the roles that three people did. Like Lucy, we talked about before. Lucy was actually it was a consolidation of three people in Ruth's life, and then everything else really pretty much holds to reality except for one thing. Lee Krasner. I keep Lee Krasner alive years beyond when she actually lived, and I know that is a leap. And that there will be experts and scholars of Pollock that
you're going to get some letters,
but I want those letters because what she says, the result is that she gets the last word.
Yeah,
and I think her last word is the definite. It's like the judge's gavel, bang, and so I'm willing to fictionalize her and use poetic license, however you want to describe it, to keep her alive 8 years longer than she actually lived, so that she can say what she believed and what in fact her behavior showed in the years after Jackson died. So there's a whole range in there, and what I feel like the way I redeem my soul and so I don't burn in hell forever about it is in the acknowledgments at the end. I will say these parts are real, these parts are not real. This person was actually a couple of people. I don't go on for every little thing that I invented, but I do say, like, here are the things that I did and what the purpose was behind them, and here's what really happened. Kind of clarify that.
Yeah. Which I think is great. And you're right. Like, having Lee have the last word is really a beautiful and poetic thing. Because, the 2006 scenario, these are not real people. The historical fiction is the 1956 scenes, which you remain true to. Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the only other thing, another example, And I call it self-indulgence. But when the Pollock painting sells for $140 million in 2006, it was done privately. You don't have like a bidding room and all of that.
Right.
And I said, no way, we're going to do an auction. An auction scene is really fun to write. Like every writer, go home tonight, write an auction scene. It's really, really fun.
So
the different personalities and behaviors, and it's almost like gamblers playing poker.
Oh, I'm sure.
That was really fun. Yeah.
And I assume that you've sat in on a Sotheby's auction?
I have not sat in on those, but I spoke with people who worked there and at other places. And I did go to other smaller scale auctions, but you can't just say, I'm just here to sort of take pictures and notes and notice what you do. They're like, no.
Right.
There's a lot of valuable stuff in this building. There's the door. And they're like secrets. They're not gentle about it. And understandably. But I found that, for example, by spending a lot of time speaking with people who work in antique Asian art, so it has fragility as an additional part of it, and this stuff is really old, that how they talked about the responsibility they had to the artwork was really enlightening. And so I didn't get exactly the thing, but that was okay. I wanted to make up my own auction, but based on what I'd learned about other auctions and other companies and how they behaved.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even imagine how much research you would have to do to make sure you've got it all right. So ultimately, when you've finished the proposal, well, let's include the proposal. How long did it take you to write it from the time your editor said, okay, get me a proposal?
I don't know how long it took, because it's all of a piece. And I don't mean to dodge the question, but I'd had a Pollock book in my head for 8 years at that point.
So you'd been writing it for a long time. Yeah. One of the things that's changed with me with each book is I used to do 100% of my writing at the desk. And then I'd leave the desk and I'd go about my business. And now I would say that I go to the desk to type all the things I've been thinking in my time away from the desk. And so I live in northern Vermont, and I live about a little over a mile from Lake Champlain. And so, which is huge. It's 112 miles long and it's 8 miles wide. Big, beautiful lake. Most of it very clean. Not all, but most of it. And so in my town's drinking water comes from there, that kind of thing. And if I walk down there and back without a phone and without anything, by the time I come back to the house, I got to go straight to the desk and pound out all the ideas that came to me. And I'm doing much more writing that way. Used to be sitting at the desk, what happens now? What happens now? Yeah.
Instead I go and I imagine, I let my mind wander, and the stuff is there. And it turns up.
I'm guessing that's more enjoyable too than forcing yourself to sit there in the chair and write, as opposed to going out and just letting the thoughts come to you.
Oh, the truth is there's no substitute for butt in chair. I mean, you got to put in the hours. It's, it takes me 2,000 hours to write a first draft. It just does. And, some books a little more, a little less, but it takes about that long. But, I'd always heard that, Hemingway used to, when he was writing, when he knew what was going to happen next, he would stop. And I always thought that was sort of like, I don't know, a bullfighter thing or a stoic thing. And then I realized, no, what he was doing is saying, okay, now I've got this scene next. I'm going to walk away from my desk, and for the next 24 hours, while I'm talking to people, while I'm having a drink, while I'm exercising, whatever I'm doing, I'm actually thinking about that scene. And so when the next day comes around, I sit down, I'm ready to go. And that I'm not doing exactly that with Hemingway, but I often will say, this is a puzzle. These characters are arguing, for example, and they're both shouting. Well, when Gwen and Ruth disagree, I want it way more nuanced than that. I want way more power going back and forth. I want it much more like a ping pong game. And so I get away from the desk, stop writing, and think about how this scene works. And by the time I get to the lake, I'm reciting lines out loud, and my neighbors are just giving me a wide margin, and it's just fine. And then I walk back, and sometimes I actually call and leave myself a voicemail, or I'll take notes on my phone because I have to because it came to me.
Yeah.
And it's more like making room. It's more like letting the sky do its part.
Beautiful. I like that. That's cool. Well,
thanks.
I want to ask you one more question about the book, and then I'd love to talk about writing and maybe some of your advice for, a lot of our listeners are in fact writers. Watches. Can we talk about watches?
Yes.
Watch faces.
Wow. Good. You honed right in. Very good. So there. Yeah.
Go ahead. You
Good.
tell me what you want to say about this. Chad's looking at me like, why are we going to talk about watches? Oh, you'll find out.
Because I saw something weird, and I needed a moment. I needed to establish almost like a motif, or I call it a meme within the novel, of a thing that Pollock does. And I happened to notice, now I read a lot of newspapers since I worked in newspapers, and I think I subscribed to 4 or 5 at this point. And so I had a hard copy of the New York Times in my hand, first time in a while. And there's always that right hand page of page 3 is Tiffany's, and they were selling watches, and all of the watches were set at 10 minutes of 2. And so, or 10 minutes after 10.
Right.
So the arms are apart like that. And
Always.
Like all the time. And I've even seen some digital clocks that say that. And so, which just cracks me up. But so, and then I started looking at other ads, and it's unbelievable. Like you look at, and you pick up a magazine, and there's, I don't know, whatever watch company is there, and it's 10 minutes of 2, or it's 10 after 10. So it has that little V. And so that was like, oh, I've got a perfectly quirky thing that Pollock will grab onto. And the first time it's a little bit odd, and his passion about it is strange. And then it comes back. And each time it comes back, it is darker, purely by virtue of repeating it. And so when he is saying it, when he is shouting it, bad stuff is going to happen. And it just built itself. And so that's where watches are in this, was that to me, it was just weird enough. Like, I don't write horror stuff, but I think that the moment that he is saying 10 after 10, 10 after 10, that actually, that should be a terrifying moment for the reader.
Yeah, you see the darkness in his head, and you experience what he's experiencing in a way.
Yeah.
And it is dark.
Yes. It is. And have you noticed any advertisements for watches since then?
Well, I'm just going to say I've never thought about it. I've never noticed it. And of course, the first thing I did is I went and looked at a ton of ads, and I was like, sure enough. And I'm sure Chad has an opinion on this. He's a watch guy.
I know exactly why it's done.
You do?
Well, I mean, just
Tell me, please. Well,
there are a couple different reasons for it. When you have that V, it sometimes will cradle the logo. And that's at the top.
Yes.
It also is out of the way of any date markers, and oftentimes out of the way of any chronograph.
Very interesting. So I'd heard that Rolex invented it for the chronograph reason in it, and I believe every other reason you gave me, and now I feel like now I understand the madness.
and the whole smile thing.
And
right?
it looks like a smile. Yeah, it's a happy as opposed to pointing down, which is a frown, right?
But if you pointed him down,
Yes,
it would
exactly.
be like, because Seiko has a position 4 date indicator. So obviously Seiko's not going to do that on their...
It's not going to work.
Yeah, so you have to have them up.
So that's probably a happy accident, no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like
Well, I just know
cars look
that
like smiling faces, the fronts of cars. And if they don't, they look really weird.
Yeah. Huh.
It's true. It's true. Okay. So this is where sometimes a little thing, the right detail can become momentous.
Kismet.
And I didn't know. I thought it was going to be just that scene, but then when it came back,
kept
I was
happening.
like, "Ooh, that is so dark."
I love it.
And then it continues to come back. Yeah, that's discovery.
As a writer, like
Yep.
when you have those moments where something insignificant all of a sudden keeps reappearing and you start to see it happening, it feels like it has, like you had nothing to do with that. Like the universe is giving this to you as a present. Oh, and by the way, this is going to happen again and again. You're like, oh my God, this is so good. That's when you get so excited, right?
Yes. So Carl Jung said, never worry about whether the rabbit is in the hat. Your subconscious put it there long ago. And so, in fact, very often when I have a problem in a scene or a problem in the plot, I don't invent something new. I look back and I say, Lucy's the one who's going to come out on Long Island to try and bring Ruth home. And so it's much more like, what resources do I have? And what you find is that your characters and your settings and your symbols have much more potency than you realized. And so you can take what's on a clock face advertisement and make it an indicator of someone's mental health.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah.
Kind of fun. Discovers.
When did you decide to start writing novels? Because I know, you trained as a journalist. You were a journalist. At what point did you say, okay, I'm gonna write a novel?
Oh, well, I've always been a storyteller, pretty much since I could talk. And so it was one form or another. And pretty much not all of the time that I was working in newspapers, but a lot of those years I was writing fiction on the side. And I wrote, The Wall of Silver and We Could Have Had and Leaving the Country of My Birth and Moonlight Sonata. These are all books that got every rejection that's possible to get. Because I was doing that while I had young children and while I was working at a very exacting and demanding newspaper job. And so, but at the same time, I was learning story and human nature, the full way. And so what happened is that I wrote a nonfiction book that did pretty well and got some attention, and then I was in the publishing world, and I was able to sell a novel that I had written. And then I've had this great relationship with HarperCollins. And so, I'm 200 pages long on the next idea, and I am a storyteller in conversation, and story is how I make sense of things. I think story is how we know each other and how we try to understand things that are inexplicable. I think it's really important in our culture. And so
Amen.
I don't think there was a day I said, I'm going to be a novelist. I just think I was writing and telling stories, and it seemed to be a way to get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just going to happen. You didn't really have a choice, did you?
No, Marvin Bell said that writers are people who are incapable of not writing.
Very true. Whether it's even you just telling stories inside your head as you're walking around the lake, for example.
Yes.
I would love to know about, your writing routine in terms of, do you write every day? Do you wait till you feel compelled? Or what does your writing routine look like?
Well, I have to start by saying just a truth. And I know this because I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, okay? And what I know is that I have a very small gift. And I know this because in Iowa, everyone there had a bigger one, had a bigger gift, had more innate talent. But what I do have is the work ethic of an ox. So if you put a yoke on my shoulders, I push. And so I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And one of the great things about this art form is that you can revise. If you are a ballerina and you make a mistake, that audience has got that memory forever. Right? It's ephemeral, but with fiction, you can go back and go back and go back and become smarter than you are, funnier than you are, bigger hearted than you actually are, all of those things. And so I write first drafts like a newspaper guy. I pound it out really fast. And then I go back, but I should say, I write early in the morning typically, and the world is quiet. I don't check email or any of that. I just have a quiet time and I write for 5 to 7 hours, and then I stop and I exercise, because by then I'm stir crazy from being in a chair.
Sure. Yeah.
Often during exercising, things occur to me to change in if I go for a run, I'll be writing in my head the whole time anyway, so much so that I come right back to the desk and write notes about what I should do first thing the next day. And I've done that so many times that I've ruined the finish on my desk. It's totally sweated off. And so that's part of that is just years of it, right? And then when I have a finished first draft, my concentrating and my conscious mind has been working so hard. What are these characters like? What is the setting? What is the clothes they're wearing? How do they speak? What are their goals and desires and fears? But the whole time the subconscious is working too. And it's usually more inventive than the logical conscious mind. So when I get to the end of the first draft, I read the book again and I go, oh, that's what it's about. And literally it'll be sometimes a surprise. And then the first revision is the most fun of the whole process, because it is literally like going back and going, no, his name is Arthur. Arthur had a different name the whole way through.
Oh, wow.
Until I went back and rewrote, and it was like, no, he's Arthur. He's very Arthur. He's friggin' King Arthur from London is what he is, because he's a Brit, right? And so then each time, then there's scenes you rewrite. There are moments that don't work. The best thing to do with a moment that doesn't work is cut it. Just take it out. It's much easier than trying to make it work if it's so like that. And then I have people I trust mostly, and I give them early drafts, and they level with me. And like I said, one female reader read the first 100 pages of an early draft and was like, nope, not working. This is a male book. And wow, it set me back. And I looked at the language and had to re-examine every sentence. And so like that. And so that's all the process. So by the time I put something on my editor's desk, it's probably fourth or fifth draft.
Wow.
One last thing I'd say is that every day I start by rewriting what I wrote the day before. It always needs help. And also it means that by the time I get to a blank page, I'm already in the story. I'm rolling. I don't even notice that I'm on the blank page. I just keep right on going. So I don't have any of the procrastination, procrastination, none of those walls, just getting to work.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that last part, because as a writer myself, that's the first thing I want to do is go back, read what I wrote, rewrite it, and then move on. And sometimes I think, am I wasting my time? Am I never going to get anywhere? So, we all have our different process, but I love how it keeps you in the story. That's cool.
Well, let us call it a movement, and you and I now are running this movement, and everyone should send their mail to you.
I'm all in. Yeah,
okay,
send your mail
great.
to me. Let's go back to Arthur and Gwen. Guinevere and Arthur, was that on purpose?
Well, it was what I can tell you is that my Arthur originally had an aristocratic name, and then my editor objected to that, and she was right. I wanted to be a more ordinary guy. And then I started messing around with different names and what worked and what didn't, and what was too British and what was not British enough, and that whole thing. And he was Hugh for a long time, and then it's like,
wow,
no,
yeah.
there's no contact. And then Arthur occurred to me, and it was only literally when I saw the galleys I went, oh my God, Arthur and Gwen. Hadn't even intended that.
That's great. But you're subconscious.
There's nobody named. Yeah, I know. Then I could have made exactly, and then I'd have to change Chili's name to Lance, and then we'd have the whole triangle.
Perfect. Well, I really, really loved this book. I loved learning about the art world. Your take on Jackson Pollock was fantastic in the fact that I learned a lot about him, but it really wasn't about him. And when I realized it was about the women in his life, I just sank in real deep and really, really enjoyed it. You did a great job, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The struggle of women, it's real. I appreciate you going there with us. And yeah, I look forward to your next book. And this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It really matters that you enjoyed it, because I think you are the second or third human being that wasn't part of the publishing machinery to tell me about that. And I know that this is different for me, that this is not World War II. I wrote 5 books that in some degree are about World War II, and it's explicitly about art rather than it being a subtext. And there is the sex in it, and there is 2 generations, and it is all of this female perspective. And so thank you. You lift my spirits, because I'm nervous about this one. I am. I don't feel this. So hopefully people will pick it up and love it, and tell their friends.
I think it's going to broaden your audience, honestly, because you're right. You've always kind of stayed in that World War II lane, and now you're taking us into deeper relationships. I think people will enjoy the sex. It's not overly done, but it says so much about power struggles and how we use sex for power. So I think it's important. You had to do that for this book to work.
It's my favorite use of sorbet ever, and let that tantalize the reader. And also, my favorite line, and I don't think it gives in the whole book my favorite line, which is when Arthur and Gwen have been making love, and she says to him, you can do anything you want, and he does something non-sexual, and she says, what are you doing? And he says, well, you said I could do whatever I want. I'm taking care of you.
Yeah. And then that's when we really get to know who Arthur is too.
Yeah. Not a bad guy.
Not a bad guy at all.
Not a bad guy.
And good for her. She decides that, maybe there is room in her life for some love. So
Spoilers.
Oh, that's true.
Spoilers. Spoilers.
We'll
Let me just say they
out.
walk off into the sunset. I've got like the walk off into the sunset ending. I feel like I get away with that. So yeah, fair.
I mean,
no spoilers.
Well, Stephen Kiernan, thank you so much for joining us here on The Premise.
Total delight. Thanks for having me.
You can learn more about Stephen P. Kiernan and his website, stephenpkiernan.com. You can also follow him on Facebook, Stephen P. Kiernan, Instagram, stephenpkiernan1.com, and follow us, The Premise, at thepremisepod.com. Be sure and subscribe and rate or review The Premise wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us get the word out, and it helps authors like Stephen sell more books, which, by the way, go buy his book. You will love it. You can follow me, your host, on Instagram and Facebook at Jennifer Thompson Consulting. Until next week, thanks for listening. This is Jennifer. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.